this morning. So good to see all of you. We start a new series today called Exchange, and we're in a time, a season where you're probably doing some exchanging, aren't you? Maybe you got a gift for Christmas or something like that, and it didn't quite fit, or maybe it's not exactly what you wanted, and perhaps the person giving you that gift attached a receipt to it, and you have decided to take it back to the store and exchange it, and you go up to the desk and say, well, I have this. I don't really want it for whatever reason. I'd like to give it to you, and I'd like to take something else home. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about exchanging things, giving things to God in exchange for Him giving you something else. And together over the next 4 weeks, we're going to make some really good exchanges. We're going to be giving up some stuff that we've clung to, but we're going to find out how that stuff was just burdening us down. And God's going to give us some really good things in return. Today, we're going to talk about comparison. We're going to give away comparison. How many of you have ever fallen into the trap of comparing yourself with others? Can I see you? You've fallen into the trap of just looking at other people and saying, well, you see them on social media maybe, and you say, I wish I could have what they have. Anybody ever done that? Have you ever seen somebody, any of you have any friends, it seems like every time you look on Facebook, they're on vacation at another exotic location, and you think, Lord, if I could only have the vacations they have, if I could only wear the clothes they have, if I could only have the friends that they have. Somehow, God, you cheated me and you gave them a whole lot of stuff and you gave them a wonderful life, and I'd really like to have that kind of life. You fall into the trap of comparison. And we're going to learn today how to exchange comparison for calling, how to exchange an attitude of comparison for the calling that Jesus Christ has on your life and the place He has for your life. I've been a pastor over 20 years now, and it just amazes me the people that struggle with comparison. People will come to me very often and say, listen, I just always look at others and I think I'm not as good as they are. I'm striving to be like somebody else. And sometimes I look at these people and I say, really? You have a struggle with comparison? And I thought today I would just invite somebody to the platform who could give you a little taste, a little testimony, a person who has struggled with comparison for a long time. And I talked with this person and I asked their permission. So we have a very much a surprise guest today that's going to come out. Would you give our guest a big hand this morning? Now, notice I don't kiss all the guests like this. In case you're wondering, I know this lady really, really well. And, babe, this is kind of like bring your wife to work day. This is my office up here. This is, you see, you never get to come up here. You know these people out here, and it's just so good to have you today. I love this lady. And honestly, when I look at her and I see her and I'm around her, she's just my favorite human being on earth. And it's hard to find anything wrong with her. And it always... Yeah, I don't get those kind of claps. I don't get those kind of applauses. But I never would have thought she would have had a struggle in comparison. Babe, isn't it true? You've had a struggle in your life before comparing yourself, hadn't you?
Yes, I always did. Growing up, I would always look at others and feel like they were better than I was, or smarter than I was, or prettier than I was, more talented. And I would always ask God, why did you not give me that talent? Why didn't you let me be like them? Because in my eyes, I was never good enough.
Was that, do you think that's something other people put on you, or is that something that came from inside of you?
It was not necessarily that. I think all of us that have siblings, we all know how that can be an easy thing to do, to just compare yourselves to others. But I think it was more inside of me. I always felt like I didn't have what it took.
Now that amazes me. Anybody else surprised that she struggles with comparison? First of all, somebody prettier than you, that's just impossible. I'm also using this opportunity to gain a lot of points, as you can see that I'm going to, but that's just impossible. You're not leaving, no. I have always wondered how it's possible she could struggle with comparison. Does that get better with age? Does it kind of naturally just go away, or does it get, I guess not. I know that look. That means no.
No, it actually intensified once I got married and I became a mom. You know, I think you get married, and as a wife, you do feel insecure at times about the kind of wife that you are. And I wasn't just a typical wife. My husband was in ministry, therefore, I would always look at other pastors' wives and see that they had talents that I didn't. You know, they could sing and they could play an instrument.
I remember when we, excuse me, I remember, excuse me. That's one strike. I remember when we first got in ministry, our first pastorate, they asked Alexa, they said, do you sing or play the piano? And she said no, and they looked kind of disappointed. That was their view of what a pastor's wife was supposed to do.
So, you know, and it wasn't just them putting that on me. It was just a lot of insecurity. And other pastors' wives love being in front of people. I'm like terrified right now, so it's not great, you know. So I always struggled with that. And then came my children, and I think as a mom, you don't know what you're doing. You don't have a clue. And you look at other moms, especially on social media, or you look at Pinterest, and you're like, they have it all together. You know, their crafts are incredible. They send their kids. On Valentine's Day, like, their kids come with incredible crafts. You know, mine was like the lollipop with a little note with them. I'm just being honest. So, I mean, they're like super crafty. They're super organized. Their house and their kids are always perfect. Mine were not. They never lose it in front of their kids. I'm not going to let her talk because she knows how many times I lost it. They would never sit their kids in front of the TV, you know, for an hour just to get a break. And I did that a lot. You know, I did that plenty of times. So
one night, this is strike two.
Oh my God.
One night, Michael was sick with an ear infection, and we couldn't get him to sleep. You remember this, babe? And he had just, I shouldn't tell that. Is that strike three that I'm telling that? He had this neat little rocking chair, and we sat him in his rocking chair and put on a Superman DVD that just looped. We fell asleep. We woke up like at 7 a.m., and he was still there watching Superman. Promise you that.
So yeah, I wasn't a perfect mom.
That was my
Sorry.
fault. It was all my
No,
fault.
it wasn't. But I would find myself like working and striving to be better. You know, I wanted to be like those moms. So I would look on Pinterest and say, how can you make this craft? Or how can I become this perfect mom, you know, this other person that I was not even called to be?
If there's a person out here, it may be a mom specifically, God sets these things up, and you may be out here and think about the moms out here, and it could be a dad. This applies to so many, but somebody out here who's struggling with comparison, what would you say to them that God has taught you and done in your life? What would help them?
I think as I went through this process, God kept telling me, you know, I made you, I created you. I gave you the gifts that you have. I gave you your personality. I gave you your talents. I gave you your looks. I made you for a specific purpose. You have a purpose in this life. And it is not to be like those other women. And it is not to be like those other moms or other wives. I have a goal for you. Stop trying to be like them, you know, and work. Yes, work on the goal, on the gifts that I have given you. But work because you're trying to get better. And you're trying to be, you know, what I created you to be, but not because you're trying to be somebody else. Because God has a plan for you, and God has a specific plan for you. God knew the mom my children would need. God knew the wife that Andy would need. And he gave me those gifts, and he gave me everything that I needed to be that. And he's doing the same for you, so don't try. Don't strive to be somebody else. Don't think that you're less than they are because you cannot sing as beautiful as they do. Because you're not. You have other gifts that they don't. God has a purpose for your life. And he has put everything in your life so that you can be that. So go after that.
Awesome. Anything else? Any other gifts or anything you're asking God to do? Anything else? You said before about singing.
Oh, yeah, I would love to sing, by the way. So still pray for that. Is that what you want?
I was thinking, and this will be strike three, this could be your big breakthrough.
Oh, no.
We could start the music and just...
That's it, I'm out.
That's strike three. She's out. Give her a big hand. Love you, babe.
Bye, I love you.
Here, babe, take this with you. Y'all pray for me today. Thankfully, right after church, I'm getting on an airplane, so I'll be safe today. What happens to us when we live in an attitude of comparison with others? What does it do to our lives? When you compare yourself continually with others, I think some of that is a bit natural. There's always a time when we're going to say, hey, I like what they're doing. I'd like to be more like that. Or I wish I was in shape like that person. Or I wish I had these gifts. I'd like to better myself. And there's something to be said for looking to people you admire and trying to emulate qualities. And that can be a good and healthy thing. But when comparison becomes an attitude, a habitual attitude, kind of a lens through which you view life, it becomes really unhealthy. You can develop an attitude of inferiority, and that's an attitude that says, I'll never be as good as they are. I'll never measure up to that person. Why am I so bad and they are so good? On the flip side of that, you can also, when you compare yourselves to others regularly, you can develop an attitude of superiority. You may say, of these people, I may never be as good as they are, but at least I'm not as bad as they are. You know, I may never achieve these heights, but at least I'm better than that guy. That's what comparison does to you. Ultimately, the price you pay when you live a life of comparing yourselves to others is you're not free to be the original person that God called you to be. Heard a book title years and years ago. A guy wrote a book, and I never have forgotten it. The title of the book was, You Were Born an Original, Don't Die a Copy. And I thought, when I continually in my life compare myself to other people and look at who they are and look at what they have and wish I had what they are, it binds me up. I'm not free to love other people when I'm in competition with them. I'm not free to serve people as Jesus serves people when I'm trying to better myself above them. Whether I'm above them or below them, I'm not free to be who I am and to love them with Jesus' love when I'm continually comparing myself to others. I heard a pastor tell a story one time. He was working with his dad, and they were building a picket fence. And his dad said, son, I'm going to be out in the yard out here, and you're going to stay in here with the table saw. And I'm going to attach the pickets to the fence as you cut them. He said, son, here is the original. This is what the standard, and this is how long they need to be. He said, keep this original and mark off the rest of them and cut me one at a time and bring them out to me, and I'll attach them. So you're going to mark them, cut them, and bring them to me one at a time, and I'm going to put them up on the rails. So the son took the original, laid it over the next board, drew a line with his pencil, and instead of cutting it, he took the original out to his dad. And he cut this one. And then he marked the next one by this one and took that one out to his dad. Any woodworkers in the place? Are you familiar with a term called kerf? Kerf is a term used for how much wood the saw actually takes away. And you have to account for that. What will happen if the kerf is like 1/32 of an inch, let's say, every 32 boards you go, you're going to take an inch off. If you stop measuring by the original and just measure by the one that's next to you. So he said he kept doing that, and pretty soon his dad came in the garage and said, son, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing just what you said, Dad. I'm marking off each one. He said, well, come look at these fence. And he'd put up about 10 pickets, and the fence was like, How do you correct that? You measure back by the original. You measure back to what you were created to be and what you were created to do. You measure yourself by Jesus Christ and by the person He wants you to be, not by the person around you. There were two guys in the Bible that really struggled with comparison. You think it shocks you that my wife struggled with it, you struggle with it. Two of the greatest heroes of the New Testament struggled with comparison. One of them is Paul, the other one is Peter. And Paul and Peter were two very, that's understating it, two highly influential guys in the New Testament church. Paul was what they called the apostle to the Gentiles. The apostle is a big fancy word meaning one who is sent. Paul was the guy that was sent to the Gentiles, to the non-Jewish world. Peter was called the apostle to the Jews. He was sent mainly to the Jewish nation. Both of these men commissioned by God to take the gospel to these different people groups. And both of these men struggled severely with comparison. Paul, the greatest scholar and writer in the New Testament church, struggled with the desire to compare himself to others all the time. Because people were trying to interfere with Paul. They were always trying to get in position over Paul. You know, Paul's history was so crazy. If you're not familiar with this in the Scripture, Paul, the man who wrote most of the New Testament, before he met Jesus, he was a persecutor of the church. He actually drugged people from their homes and had them killed for their faith. And he met Jesus on the road out of a shining light. And Jesus changed his life in a moment. And a man who was a persecutor of the church turned and became the greatest proponent, the greatest evangelist, if you will, the greatest preacher that the New Testament church ever saw. That just talks about the power, speaks about the power of Jesus Christ. But a lot of people didn't let Paul forget his past. They said, we know where you've been, we know what you've done. Anybody run into anybody like that? They're continually wanting to hold you back to something you did way back then. So they continually were putting it in Paul's face that you're not worthy of the position that you have. All the time he was hearing that. So he was tempted to compare himself with others. But this is what he said in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. He said this, and he was talking about comparing himself with other preachers and teachers. He said, don't worry, we wouldn't dare say that we are as wonderful as these other men who tell you how important they are. You ever run into a person like that? Anybody ever run into a person that they're always telling you how important they are? You've been around people who always have to tell you how many degrees they have, and they have to tell their title, and they have to tell their position at work, and everything they've done, and the money they had, and all those people. And we're tempted to think how arrogant those people are. Oftentimes, the loudest voices in the room are the most insecure people. They're often the most insecure because they're always having to prove to everybody how good they are. And Paul's saying, I'm not going to compare myself with these people who tell you how important they are. He said they are only comparing themselves with each other. Remember the picket fence. They're comparing themselves with the one next to them, not the original. He said using themselves as a standard of measurement. Paul says how ignorant that is. That's not wisdom. Paul said this again in verse 13. We will not boast about things done outside our area of authority. We will boast only about what has happened within the boundaries of the work God has given us, which includes our working with you. Paul said something very powerful there. I'm not going to compare myself with others who are doing things outside of the boundaries God has put me over. God has given them something, and He's given me something. And I'm not going to spend my life comparing myself with what they have. I'm going to be faithful to do in my sphere of influence what God has called me to do. We want to talk today about exchanging comparison for calling. Exchanging the attitude in your life that you've always got to look around and judge yourself by everybody else. If you live that kind of life, everybody else determines your value. Everybody else determines your worth. Everybody around you determines your state of mind. And you're never secure in who Jesus made you. I love to be around people who are secure in who Jesus made them to be and who are secure in what they're doing. Paul said, I'm going to focus my life on my calling and who He made me and who He called me to be. That's the answer. Stop looking around you. Don't let the people around you determine your value. I've struggled with it in my own life. You'll see God doing good things and saving people. Aren't you excited at the good things God's doing at Upward? He's doing so many good things. Every Sunday in 2018, somebody came to Jesus in these services. Every Sunday, somebody came to know Jesus. You guys did so well in the Christmas offering this year. You guys gave over $50,000 that went away, that we gave. We were able to pay off a good portion of the remodel. Half of it went to that. The other half is blessing people all over our community. We were able to give a donation to help with a church that's doing a prom for special needs children next month, and we were able to invest in that and say, let us just give to that. We're going to be buying some computers for a ministry just up the street that ministers to special needs adults. We're going to be helping with the jail ministry. We're going to be helping with several ministries in the community. I'm in communication with them now saying, how can we help? And because of your generosity, we're able to just give freely. And I love that. I'm calling them, say, is there anything you need? They said, we need two computers. I said, done. Isn't that wonderful? I'm having a lot of fun. God's doing some great things. But sometimes even we get tempted. Even I get tempted. I see another church that's doing something great, and I see a ministry. I see a building that's twice the size of this one, maybe twice the people, and I think, God, what am I doing wrong? Isn't that possible for all of us to get to that place? And God keeps reminding me, son, focus on who I've called you to be. Focus on where I've planted you and enjoy what I'm doing in your life. Peter struggled. Paul struggled. The Apostle Peter, what a big mouth. Some people say, I'd like to have met one of the disciples. Which one would I have liked to met? I don't know that I would have liked Peter, because I really have a challenge getting along with people who are mouthy. If that's one thing that I struggle, the Jesus in me loves everybody, but the Anthony Craver in me struggles with some people. And if anyone has a hint of arrogance, it just really bugs me. If you are arrogant, I have a problem with that. And I'm not sure I would have gotten along very well with Peter. But if you'll really look at Peter's life, you will see that he struggled with comparison all his life. He was loudmouth and confident, supposedly. But that confidence, I think, betrayed a real insecurity in his life, that he always had to be proving himself. Jesus called Peter and his brother Andrew. This is a miraculous story. Jesus was walking by the sea, and he saw Peter and his brother Andrew, and he said this. They were fishermen. They had their nets there. They were in the act of fishing, and Jesus said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And you know what the Bible said? This is just miraculous to me. It said they left their nets and followed him. You ever met a fisherman? I don't know many fishermen I can say, put down the pole and we'll go have a steak dinner. They just don't leave. They love it. These guys left their occupation, their families, their homes, everything. Jesus just walks by and says, follow me. And you're not going to fish for fish anymore. You're going to fish for men. He called them into their destiny. And I'm learning that's what Jesus always does for us. He calls us into our destiny in Him. And as long as we're busy looking at everybody else's calling and everybody else's destiny, we can't see what He's called us to do. And He's calling Peter and his brother Andrew, saying, follow me, and you're still going to fish, but you're going to be fishing for people now, not fish. So they go on this journey together, and Peter is his typical loudmouth self many times. I mean, there's a time when Peter says something and Jesus turns around and says, get thee behind me, Satan. There's a time in the Scripture in the life of Jesus when Peter said something and it's almost as if God rebukes him with a voice from heaven. I've never been that bad, not yet. Peter's always putting his foot in his mouth all the time. They're at the Last Supper. You've seen the famous painting, of the Last Supper. They're all there, and Jesus is going to be betrayed that night. And Jesus tells the disciples, He said, one of you is going to betray me tonight. I often wonder why He told them that. Jesus knew a lot, and he didn't always tell everything. I always wondered why it's almost like he dropped a bomb in the room. One of you is going to betray me tonight. I think the guys needed to do some soul searching. I think he inspired them to look inside themselves and see their love for him. Well, of course, our hero Peter steps up to Jesus and has a little swagger about him. You can just read it. He said, well, Jesus, I'm making this kind of southern for you. I don't know about the rest of these guys. I don't know what John and Andrew and Bartholomew and Judas and all, I don't know what they're doing. But Jesus, I'm your guy. I just want you to know, still, this is comparison. Do you understand? This is superiority. I just want you to know, Jesus, even if all these other guys leave you, I'm ready to die with you right now. And Jesus just looked at him and said, Peter, Peter, the truth is, you're going to deny me 3 times tonight. You're going to blow it 3 times tonight. Peter couldn't believe it. And Jesus said, you're about to go through a test, Peter, but I'm praying for you. I love that about Jesus. I love the heart of Jesus. The more I see his heart, the more I love him. He didn't think about the sting of betrayal. He didn't get into the mode of, well, I've been with you for 3 years and served you, and now look at what you're doing to me. Jesus knew it, and he still loved the man. He still was calling him into his destiny, even knowing that failure was ahead of him. Isn't it wonderful that Jesus still loves us, even knowing that we're still going to fail some, we're still going to make some mistakes, we're still going to make some messes. He keeps calling us to him. So he says, Peter, I prayed for you. Peter's in the comparison trap. Maybe you don't know the story, maybe you do, but Jesus is arrested, and Peter the Bible said Peter followed along at a distance. He wanted to see what was happening, and he was warming himself by the fire. And people came up and said, aren't you one of his disciples? Peter said, no, I'm not a disciple. Another person came along and said, aren't you? Yeah, you were with him. You're one of the disciples. Peter said, no, I don't know the man. I'm not his disciple. And finally, the Bible tells us that a little girl, it couldn't be more perfect symbolically. I believe it really happened this way, but it couldn't be more perfect. A little girl comes and said, yeah, I know, you're one of those. And he cursed and said, I don't know the man. I'm not his disciple. And it very interesting, one of the Gospels records that when he gave that third betrayal, he looked up and Jesus was there. And he actually looked him in the eye when he made that betrayal. And the rooster crowed. Jesus had said that would happen. And he recognized all this bravado was false. All this bravado came from a sense of comparing himself to others. All this brag that he had and all this pride that he had really meant nothing because it was based on comparing himself to others. It wasn't based on his relationship with Jesus. And he failed. And the Bible said he went out and wept bitterly. It's over. He has renounced Jesus. He has renounced being a disciple. He has renounced being a fisher of men. And as far as Peter's concerned, it's over. The next day, Jesus is killed. He's crucified and he's put in a tomb. And Peter has got to think it's all over. It's done. But as we know, as you read the Scripture, the grave couldn't hold him. He rose again. He rose again. And the message went out. Go tell my disciples and Peter. Now, there's 2 reasons there. Number 1, Peter had renounced being a disciple. Peter said, I quit. No more of that for me. So he's separate from the group now. But it's also powerful that he was named. I want Peter to know this. I want him to know that I'm alive. And the Bible said there's a couple of occasions now that after that, Jesus appeared to the disciples. And Peter's there. How awkward. You ever been in an awkward situation? Anybody? You ever run into somebody you used to date? Nobody will raise their hands. You're afraid of getting slapped, right? Should I tell them what happened to me the other week, a few weeks? Should I tell them that? Yeah, you want to. I was at a church getting ready to preach. I'd been invited to preach this wasn't too long ago at a church, and I was sitting on the front row. I was getting ready to get up and preach, and somebody heard my name, Andy Craver. I thought, who is that? Alexa's sitting with me. I looked over, and here comes a girl I used to date. Then I got to get up and preach. You ever been in an awkward situation? Had to be awkward for Jesus, for Peter to be there with Jesus. It's not recorded that they said anything. Must have been silent. Must have been quiet. It's not recorded that Jesus said anything specifically to Peter. I think there were about 2 appearances that Jesus appeared to him, and it's almost like there had to be an awkward tension in the room because Peter has just quit. It's like he resigned, and all of a sudden he shows up again. And nobody knows, well, is he in or is he out? And I'm sure the other disciples were like, well, what's Jesus going to do with this guy? He quit. You know, he left Jesus at the worst possible moment. Of course, only John had any right to say anything because all of them quit except John. John's the only one that stayed. But there was another appearance. Peter finally had had enough, and this is very significant. I want you to hear this. Peter, it specifically says, Peter said, I'm going fishing. Now that may sound like a hobby for you, but I believe it was a deeper statement for Peter. Peter saying, I'm going back to the only thing I know. Jesus is risen, I know it, but nothing has been said. The only thing I know to do is to go back and fish for fish. When you live a life of comparison, you're going to come to a place of disappointment, and you're going to hit a wall, and the only thing you know to do when you hit that wall is turn back and do what you used to do and be what you used to be. It's the only thing you can do. So Peter said, let's go fishing. So he's a leader. How many of you know a leader can lead you to good things or bad? A leader will lead you somewhere. So they're all out in the boat fishing. I don't think it's a sin to go back and go fish, but I think the symbolism there is pretty powerful that Peter's turning back. So they get in the boat. And these great fishermen fish all night and caught nothing. And the sun starts coming up, and they see a man out on the shore. And he's so far away they can't tell who it is. And the man says, hey, what y'all doing out there? The Bible says they're about 100 yards from shore. And the man yells out, how you doing? Are they biting? You know, that's typical talk. They biting? What they biting on out? You know. You got to bring it in here to Henderson County. You know what I'm saying? We're bringing the Bible home here. And they yell out and said, man, we've been fishing all night long and we haven't got a bite. And he said, why don't you try this? Cast your nets over to the right. And they think this has happened before. Because it had. They said, cast your nets to the right. And they did it. And they began to pull the nets up. And the Bible said there were 153 fish in the net immediately. And all of a sudden they realized this has happened before. That's Jesus. John leaned over to Peter. He said, it's the Lord. You know what Peter did? It said Peter got up, jumped out of the boat. Some people say Peter jumped out of the boat because he couldn't wait to get to Jesus. I think maybe, I read this and I agree with it, I think maybe Peter wanted to get to Jesus and get all this worked out before the other guys came. Don't you think he wanted to sit down with Jesus and say, listen, they're coming, Jesus, but can we just, am I okay? We okay? You good? I'm good? We all right? Anyway, Peter came to the shore and Jesus is cooking breakfast. Bread and fish. Hidden a fire. And they drug those fish in and they had breakfast. And I love what Jesus didn't say. Peter comes running up to him on the shore, and if it had been me, I'd have said, well, we're getting southern again. Excuse me. Well, look who's coming here. Yeah, big boy. Wasn't going to deny me, were you? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I know how it is. I see how it is now. You ever said anything like that? Only got one hand. Have you ever said anything like that? I knew it. I knew you'd come crawling back here. Just got to be honest. In the flesh, doesn't it feel good to be in that position? Doesn't it just, in the flesh, I know it's sin. I get it. The Bible said there's pleasure in sin for a season, and it's pleasure to be able to say, I told you so. That's wrong. Don't do it. Come crawling back to me, jump out of that boat. Just a week ago, you were denying you even knew me. Jesus never said that. Jesus never said that. John 21:15, powerful verse. It said, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, many people think this is another act of comparison. Jesus would never say, Kenneth, do you love me more than Cindy? He doesn't do that. Jesus doesn't pit us against each other. What's the these? I think the these were the 153 fish. I think he was saying, Peter, do you love me more than you love catching fish? Do you love me and the calling I have for your life more than the former identity you had? Do you love me? I love it. Jesus gave him a way back home. The whole time on the beach, Jesus is creating a path for Peter to come home. Some of you may have been running from God. Today is your day to come home to Jesus Christ. You may have been burned before. We all have. You may have had a Christian hurt you. You may have had a church hurt you. Today's your day to come home. Some of you, you may be with us online or here, either one, and you're watching. You've never known Christ, but today something's resonating in your heart that Jesus is home, because that's what he does. Whatever you've done, wherever you've been, however you've failed, Jesus creates a path for you to come home. And he didn't say, look who's coming here. He said, Peter, do you love me? And I think for days on end, that had been the question Peter had wanted to answer. For days, Peter had been wanting to tell Jesus, Jesus, I failed miserably, but I love you. I remember where we've been and what we've done and all that you've done for me, and I want to declare my love. And Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter replied and said, you know I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my lambs. You know what Jesus did by that statement? He said, I'm calling you back to what I called you to originally. You're going to fish for men, and you're going to feed my lambs. In that sentence, he repeated it 3 times. There's a lot to learn in here that I'm not even touching on, but he called Peter back to his calling. How many of you know even in restoration we still have problems? How many of you think that Peter never had a problem again? He didn't even get off the beach. John 21 through 22, our old friend is back. This is after Jesus has called him back. And it said, he was talking about John. Peter asked Jesus, what about him, Lord? I just imagine Jesus going, but I don't know that Jesus did that. I've never seen a painting with Jesus doing this. He's always got sheep under his arm. But I think once in a while Jesus had to go, oh my gosh, he's just not getting it. Don't tell anybody I said that. I'm just thinking. What about him? What about John? What are you going to do with him? Even in the midst of restoration, that nature to compare was so strong in Peter. And I want you to hear what Jesus said. Jesus said, if I want him to remain alive till I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me. And here's what I want to tell you today. What is everybody else to you? As for you and me, we're called to follow Jesus. We're called to follow Jesus. We're called to correct back to the original, to know him. Now, what do I need to do, Pastor? You need to understand that the world needs you, not a copy, not an altered version. The world needs you, the you that Jesus has called you to be. And every time you're tempted to compare, and you're going to be, you make a decision. I'm not going to let that attitude be in my life anymore. Now, there's some things, folks, you have to discipline your mind. You can't just say, God, take this away. You discipline your mind and you say, I'm not going to look at other people anymore and wish I was them. I'm going to recognize who I am in Christ. You know, your name is known in heaven. You know what's going to happen when my wife gets to heaven? People are going to be looking around saying, look there, that's Alexa Craver. Look, there's Craig Dukes. Look, there's Joyce Marsteller. Because you're known in heaven for who he made you to be. And you're called to do heroic things on this earth for him. Be that. Be that person. Every time you're tempted, say, nope. I am loved by Jesus. I am called by Jesus. I am accepted by Jesus. And I am gifted by Jesus to be what he's called me to be. Amen. Would you bow with me? Father, we thank you.